He came to the settlement meeting expecting to divide assets. But when his wife walked through the frosted glass doors of the law office, carrying a rolled-up architectural blueprint under one arm and a 6-week-old baby girl strapped to her chest, Dominic Kessler forgot every rehearsed line his legal team had spent 3 weeks preparing. The woman sitting beside him, his business partner, his lover, the one he had quietly moved into his penthouse before the separation papers were even filed, pulled her hand from his thigh beneath the table. Because in that room, on the 14th February Toronto skyline, every lie Dominic had carefully constructed was about to unravel, and the blueprint his wife carried was the match. Before we continue, can I ask a small favor? If you enjoy this story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly helps us keep bringing you these heartfelt stories. Thank you. Now, let's get into it. Maren Kessler stood outside the elevator on the 14th floor, adjusting the wool blanket around her daughter's sleeping face. The baby's name was Lila. She was 6 weeks and 2 days old, born on a December night during an ice storm in a hospital where Maren had checked herself in alone, driven by her downstairs neighbor, a retired nurse named June, who had found Maren gripping the kitchen counter at midnight, breathing through contractions with the composure of a woman who had already survived worse pain than labor. Lila did not know where she was. She did not know that the man on the other side of those doors had once pressed his ear to Maren's belly at 14 weeks and whispered, "I hope she has your stubbornness." She did not know that same man had later told his lawyer the pregnancy was strategically timed and suggested the child might not even be his. Maren's lawyer, Catherine Dow, walked beside her in a fitted navy coat, carrying a leather case thick with documents. Catherine was calm the way surgeons were calm, precise, unhurried, lethal when necessary. No judge would fault a woman 6 weeks postpartum. Maren looked at the frosted glass doors. "He's been stalling for 4 months. Every delay costs me money I don't have and sleep I can't afford." Catherine studied her, then gave a single nod. They walked in. The boardroom smelled of coffee and leather. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the CN Tower, half hidden in cloud. A long walnut table dominated the room, surrounded by high-backed chairs. Legal folders sat in neat stacks. A carafe of water sweated quietly beside untouched glasses. Dominic was already seated at the far end. Dominic Kessler, CEO of Kessler Development Corp., the man who had transformed derelict waterfront lots from Hamilton to Halifax into luxury condominium towers. The man whose face appeared in Toronto Life profiles, Globe and Mail business sections, and charity gala photo walls. The man Maren had married when he was still borrowing against his mother's house to fund his first renovation project in Leslieville. He wore a charcoal suit. His jaw was set. His eyes were careful. He looked like a man preparing to win. Beside him sat Nadia Serrano. She wore a cream blazer, gold jewelry, and the particular confidence of a woman who believed she had already been chosen. Her fingers rested near Dominic's wrist, close enough to claim, casual enough to deny. Nadia was Kessler Development's VP of Brand Strategy. She had joined the company 2 years ago through a condo launch campaign and had become something more within 6 months. Maren did not learn this from suspicion. She learned it from an invoice. A weekend at the Fairmont Le Chateau Frontenac in Quebec City, billed to the company for 2 guests. On the same weekend, Dominic had told Maren he was meeting investors in Calgary. Maren sat down across from them. Lila stirred against her chest, made a soft sound, then settled. Dominic stared at the baby. His expression shifted, something between recognition and alarm. "Maren." His voice was low. She did not respond. She placed the rolled blueprint on the table beside her folder. Then, back to her face, "When was she born?" Maren met his gaze. "December 19th. A pause. Something flickered behind his eyes. "You didn't." "I did." Maren's voice was steady. "I told you at 11 weeks. You said the timing was unfortunate. You said I was complicating the separation. You told your lawyer I was using the pregnancy as leverage." Dominic's jaw tightened. Nadia shifted in her chair. Maren continued without raising her voice. Every word carried weight she had been storing for months. "You never asked how the birth went. You never asked her name. You found out she existed through a legal filing, and your only response was to send your lawyer a note confirming this meeting would proceed on schedule. Silence pressed against the glass walls. Nadia's hand moved slowly away from Dominic's wrist. Catherine opened her case. "Shall we begin?" Dominic's lawyer, Gerald Fisk, cleared his throat. "We're here to finalize the division of marital assets. Emotional matters can be handled." Emotional matters became legal matters, Catherine said. The moment Mr. Kessler failed to disclose a dependent child, omitted a jointly acquired property from the asset declaration, and attempted to restructure ownership of said property through a numbered company 4 months before filing. She placed a document on the table and slid it toward Fisk. "This is the original purchase agreement for Briar Cliff, the lakefront property on Muskoka's Peninsula Lake. Acquired 5 years into the marriage. Joint decision. Funded from a shared investment account." Dominic leaned forward slightly. "My development team handled the acquisition. It was a business asset." Catherine placed a second document down. "And this is a transfer order dated September 14th from its original holding into a numbered Ontario company, 287461 Ontario Inc., registered 4 days after Mr. Kessler retained divorce counsel." Fisk's expression stiffened. Dominic's eyes hardened. "Where did you get that?" Catherine did not answer the question. She placed a third document on the table. Marin watched Dominic's face. She had seen that expression before, the calculation of who had betrayed him and how much damage was already done. His gaze moved to Nadia. Nadia had gone pale. "You told me it was routine restructuring," Nadia said quietly. Dominic's voice dropped. "Not here. You said she was trying to take assets she had no claim to." Marin's chest tightened. She looked down at Lila. The baby's fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. Nadia turned to Marin. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "He told me you were manipulative, that you were dragging out the divorce for money." Marin said nothing. Nadia looked at Lila, then back at Dominic. "You told me the baby probably wasn't yours." The room went silent. Catherine let the silence do its work. Then she opened another folder. "Since Mr. Kessler has formally questioned paternity, we're prepared to request court-ordered testing. However, given the documented fertility treatments both party clinic and Mr. Kessler's recorded attendance at multiple appointments prior to separation, the court will likely view his denial as both strategic and malicious." Fisk leaned toward Dominic and whispered something. Dominic did not respond. His eyes had not left the baby. For one unguarded moment, the boardroom CEO disappeared. Marin saw the man she had married, the one who had sat beside her in that clinic waiting room, holding her hand so tightly, his knuckles went white. The morning they learned their first round VF had failed, the man who had driven home in silence, then pulled over on the Don Valley Parkway because he could not see the road through his tears. That man had wanted a family more than anything. This man had denied his daughter's existence to protect a real estate portfolio. Nadia stood abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor. "I need a moment." Dominic reached for her arm. "Sit down." The command was quiet, but Marin recognized it. She had heard that voice before, in their kitchen, in their bedroom, in the careful silences that preceded his worst moods. Nadia looked at his hand on her arm. Then she pulled free. "Don't!" She walked out. Dominic watched her go. His composure cracked for exactly 2 seconds before he looked at him across the table. "That's how it starts," she said softly. He turned to her. "What?" The grip, the command, the assumption that your comfort matters more than her dignity. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I lived it for 8 years, Dominic." Fisk requested a recess. Catherine agreed, but not before stating that if the next session did not produce a fair settlement, she would file for emergency financial disclosure and seek sanctions for asset concealment. Marin stepped into the hallway. Her legs felt hollow. Catherine guided her to a bench near the windows where gray light fell across the carpet.
"You were strong in there,"
Catherine said. Marin looked down at Lila.
"I don't feel strong."
"Those two things aren't mutually exclusive." Marin tried to smile, but her eyes filled instead. She had trained herself not to cry over the past 9 months. Not when Dominic stopped answering her calls. Not when she attended every ultrasound alone. Not when she assembled the crib by herself at 8 months pregnant. Her back screaming, her hands shaking, refusing to call anyone because asking for help felt like admitting she had been abandoned. Not when labor came at midnight during an ice storm and she had to knock on June's door because there was no one else. Not when the nurse asked, "Is the father on his way?" And Marin had simply said, "No," but now sitting in a Bay Street hallway with her sleeping daughter against her chest, the tears came, quiet, steady, unstoppable. Catherine sat beside her without speaking. Sometimes silence was the kindest thing a person could offer. Down the corridor near the washroom doors, Nadia stood unseen. She had heard enough. She had seen enough. And for the first time since she had accepted Dominic's invitation to dinner at Canoe 2 years ago, she questioned every story he had told her. He had said Marin was cold, that the marriage had been dying for years, that Marin had never supported his ambitions, had resented his success, envied his world, refused to grow alongside him. He said she was difficult, demanding, and calculating. Nadia had believed him because believing him was easier than guilt. But the woman she had just watched was none of those things. She was exhausted and wounded and holding a baby whose father had chosen a spreadsheet over a birth. Nadia returned to the boardroom before anyone else. Dominic stood at the window, speaking in a low, controlled voice into his phone. "I don't care what it takes. Find out how Dow's team got those transfer records." Then Dominic said something that made her stomach fold in on itself. "If Marin pushes this further, we go after custody. Postpartum instability, financial dependence, the apartment situation. Whatever Fisk can build a case around, she just had a baby. It won't be hard to make her look like she's falling apart." Nadia stepped backward. Her heel caught the carpet. She left before he turned around. That evening, Marin returned to the apartment she had been renting in a walk-up near Bloor and Ossington. It 2 bedrooms, radiator heat, a kitchen where the fridge hummed too loudly at night. Nothing like the King West penthouse she had left behind, but it was hers. The walls were painted a color she had chosen. The bookshelves held books she had actually read. Lila's bassinet sat near the bedroom window where morning light came through soft and warm. June came upstairs with lentil soup and bread. "You look like you went 12 rounds, the older woman said. Marin exhaled. The other guy wore a Brioni suit. June kissed Lila's forehead. "Suits don't win fights, sweetheart. Character does." After June left, Marin fed Lila, changed her, rocked her to sleep. Then she sat on the couch in the dark. Too tired to move, too wired to rest. Her phone buzzed. An email from an address she did not recognize. No subject line. One sentence. "I believed the wrong person. I'm sorry. These might help." 6 attachments. Bank transfer records. Internal memos from Kessler Developments, a scanned authorization bearing Dominic's signature, directing the transfer of Briar Cliff into the numbered company. An email chain discussing the timing. Complete the restructuring before Marin's counsel reviews the marital property list. And one message from Dominic himself to his finance director. "Keep Nadia's name off the Briar Cliff paperwork. She's asking questions I don't want answered." Marin stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then another message arrived. This one was from Nadia Serrano directly. "You don't owe me anything, but I owe you honesty. He lied to both of us. I'll testify if you need me to." Marin set the phone down slowly. Lila slept beside her, breathing in the small, steady rhythm of someone who trusted the world completely. For the first time in months, Marin felt something shift beneath her feet. Not rescue. Not salvation, something quieter. The ground, finally, holding firm. If you're enjoying the story so far, please take a moment to like and subscribe.
Story you. Thank you.
Now, back to the story. The next 2 weeks moved fast. Catherine filed an emergency motion. The court ordered full financial disclosure. Dominic's attempt to conceal Briar Cliff became the centerpiece of the case. His corporate board was notified. Investors in a new Halifax waterfront project requested clarification. A partnership with a major pension fund was quietly suspended pending review. Then the press found it. Toronto developer accused of hiding marital property weeks after wife gives birth alone during ice storm. The story spread through every business page and real estate forum in the country. Dominic Kessler, the man who had built his brand on precision, transparency, and civic partnership, the man who sponsored hospital wings and sat on arts council boards, was suddenly a headline for all the wrong reasons. He called Marin. she answered on speaker. Catherine listened. Marin. His voice sounded different, stripped. What do you want? I want to see her. Marin closed her eyes. She has a name, Dominic. A pause. Lila. The way he said it, carefully, as though tasting something fragile. I want to see Lila. You wanted to pretend she didn't exist. I was angry. No, Marin said quietly. You were calculating. Silence. Then, I made mistakes. Marin almost laughed, but the sound that came out was closer to grief. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is missing a phone call. You abandoned your pregnant wife, denied your child, brought your girlfriend to our settlement meeting, and tried to steal the one property you knew I cared about. His breathing changed. You don't know what it's like, she continued, to lie in a hospital bed after 18 hours of labor and look at the door and know, not wonder, know that no one is coming. You don't know what it's like to fill out emergency contact forms and write your neighbor's name because your husband is busy protecting his portfolio to acknowledge your existence. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. So no, you don't get to call this a mistake because the consequences Ispicorus finally caught up. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was lower. I'm sorry. For what, specifically? For everything. For not believing you. For letting Nadia sit beside me like she'd earned something that was yours. For making you do this alone. For questioning Lila. For becoming exactly the kind of man my mother would have been ashamed of. Marin heard something real in his voice. But real did not undo ruin. You can arrange supervised visitation through Catherine's office, she said. Marin, please? No. You don't get to rush into her life because guilt is keeping you up at night. Lila is not your redemption project. That sentence stayed with Dominic long after the call ended. In the weeks that followed, consequences arrived not like a storm, but like gravity, steady, indifferent, cumulative. The court awarded Briar Cliff to Marin as part of the final settlement, along with child support, full medical coverage for Lila, and a trust fund Dominic could contribute to but not control. The CFO who had facilitated the asset concealment cooperated with investigators in exchange for immunity. Nadia gave a sworn statement and resigned from Kessler Development. The same week, the Halifax deal collapsed. Dominic stepped down as CEO pending an internal governance review. A profile in the Globe's report on business that had been scheduled as a celebration of his latest project was rewritten overnight into something far less flattering. But the hardest consequence was not financial. It was the first supervised visit. It happened on a Saturday morning in March, at a family services center in Midtown. The room had soft lighting, a playmat on the floor, and a counselor who sat near the door with a clipboard. Dominic arrived early, no suit jacket, no watch. He looked thinner, less assembled, less certain of anything. When Marin walked in carrying Lila, Dominic stood immediately, his eyes filled before he could stop it. Lila was 2 months old by then. She wore a knitted hat June had made, pale yellow with small ears. Her eyes were dark and wide, and she stared at the seriousness of someone discovering light for the first time. The counselor nodded. Marin placed Lila in Dominic's arms. He froze. The weight of her, so slight, so complete, broke something in him that legal proceedings and press coverage had only cracked. Hi, he whispered. Lila blinked at him. I'm sorry, he said to her. I'm so sorry. Lila yawned. Dominic cried. Not dramatically, not loudly, completely. Marin looked away. She did not want to feel anything for him. But grief was complicated when it wore the face of someone she had once built a life with. The divorce was finalized in April. No courtroom outbursts, no headlines, just signatures, legal terminology, and the quiet administrative end of something Marin had once believed would last her whole life. Outside the courthouse on University Avenue, Catherine guided Marin toward a side exit. Dominic asked for one moment. Marin stopped near the stone steps. Lila was awake in the carrier, watching pigeons. Dominic stood a few feet away. He did not reach for her. He had learned slowly that closeness was not something to take. Briar Cliff was always your dream, he said. I should never have touched it. No, Marin said. You shouldn't have. I'm going to spend a long time sitting with who I became. She looked at him. Sitting with it is easy. Changing is the hard part. I know. Do you? He nodded slowly. I started seeing someone, a therapist, I mean. Marin was surprised, but her expression did not change. I stepped back from the foundation board, he continued, rebuilding it with independent oversight. No more vanity projects. That's a start. I don't expect forgiveness. Good, she said. Because I don't have any to give right now. He accepted that. For the first time in their entire marriage, he did not argue with her pain. He did not try to solve it, manage it, or buy his way around it. He simply stood still and let it exist. Then he looked at Lila. Can I say goodbye to her? Maren hesitated. Then she stepped closer. Dominic leaned down, keeping his hands at his sides. Bye, Lila. I'll see you Saturday. He straightened. His eyes were red. I loved you badly, Maren. She stopped breathing for a moment. But I did love you. Maren looked at him for a long time. I know, she said. Then she turned and walked toward Catherine's car without looking back. That May, Maren left Toronto. Briar Cliff sat on 3 acres of sloping granite and birch forest on the eastern shore of Peninsula Lake in Muskoka. The main cottage was a century-old timber frame structure with a stone fireplace, wide plank floors, and a wraparound porch that looked out over water, so still it reflected the sky like a second heaven. It needed work. The roof had 2 soft spots. The dock pilings were rotting, and raccoons had claimed the boathouse. But the bones were sound. June came for the first month, announcing that the baby needed a grandmother with opinions. Catherine drove up on a long weekend with wine. Maren couldn't drink because she was nursing. They sat on the dock and laughed anyway. Maren converted the old boathouse into a drafting studio once the raccoons were evicted. She had been a residential architect before the marriage, before Dominic's world had swallowed hers whole. She had designed their first home together, the Leslieville semi-detached, that Dominic had renovated and sold for 4 times its purchase price. That project had launched everything. Her design, his execution, their partnership back when it had still meant something. Now she began taking commissions again. Small projects, at first a cottage renovation in Huntsville, a laneway house in Gravenhurst. Slowly her name returned to architectural circles, not as Mrs. Kessler, as Maren Aldridge, her name, her work, her own. By July, Briarcliff had become something she had never experienced inside her marriage. Peaceful, not perfect. The well pump failed twice, Leela developed colic for 3 terrible weeks, and Maren once fell asleep at her drafting table and woke with pencil marks on her cheek during a client video call. But she was free, and freedom, she discovered, was not always dramatic. Sometimes freedom was morning coffee on the porch while the lake turned gold. Sometimes it was paying her own bills. Sometimes it was sleeping without listening for the front door. Sometimes it was simply no longer waiting to be chosen. Dominic visited every other Saturday, always supervised at first, always respectful. He arrived without assistance, without expensive gifts, without the armor of wealth he had worn for so long it had become his skin. Once he brought diapers. Maren stared at the box. You brought diapers? He looked uncertain. The counselor said to bring something useful. That might be the least ridiculous thing you've ever done, she said before she could stop herself. They both went quiet. Then Maren looked away, embarrassed by the warmth that had crept into her voice uninvited. Dominic did not push. He had learned, perhaps for the first time in his life, that patience was not the same as waiting for what you wanted. It was respecting that what you wanted might never come. Months passed. Lila grew. Dominic learned how to hold her without looking terrified, how to warm a bottle to the right temperature, how to change a diaper without gagging, how to sit on a blanket in the grass and make absurd faces until his daughter laughed so hard she hiccuped. One afternoon in September, Maren came around the side of the cottage and found him at the edge of the property. Lila in a carrier on his chest, standing among the birch trees where the land sloped down toward the water. The light was amber and low. Lila was asleep. He was speaking quietly to her. Your mum designed this place in her head before I ever understood what home meant. I almost took it from her because I was too proud to admit she was the best thing that ever happened to me. Maren stood behind a birch trunk, listening. She saved me once, you know, before any of this, before the towers and the press and the money that made me stupid. She believed in me when all I had was a line of credit and a dream about fixing broken houses, and I repaid her by forgetting who held me together. His voice wavered. When you're older, I'll tell you the real version, not the one that makes me look good, the truth. So you'll know that being a man isn't about what you build. It's about who you protect. Marin's eyes filled. She stepped back before he saw her and walked to the dock, where she sat with her feet over the water until the tears passed. That night, long after Dominic had driven back to the city, she sat on the porch watching the lake disappear into darkness. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge something complicated. She did not hate him anymore. But not hating someone was not the same as trusting them, and it was nowhere near love, if love ever returned, and she was not certain it would. It would have to arrive without demands. It would have to prove it had learned humility. It would have to earn every single step. Winter came early to Muskoka that year. Snow buried Briar Cliff in white silence by mid-November. The lake froze thick enough to walk on by December. Dominic did not miss a single visit. Not once. Not when his company faced a shareholder lawsuit. Not when a reporter followed him to Huntsville. Not when a snowstorm closed the 400 and he drove 3 hours on back roads through Aurelia and Bracebridge, arriving with numb hands and slush on his boots. Marin opened the door and looked at him. "You could have called." He stamped snow off his jacket. "I told Lila I'd come. She's 5 months old. She doesn't understand Saturdays." Dominic met her eyes. "I do." Something inside, Marin shifted. Not fully, not all at once, but enough to let a small, cautious warmth through the door she had kept bolted for a year. By Lila's first birthday, things had changed, not between them but inside each of them separately. Dominic had returned to his company in a diminished role. He sold 2 vanity properties, restructured the corporate foundation, and quietly funded a maternal housing initiative through a women's shelter in Parkdale. No press release, no naming rights. When a board member asked why, he said, because no one should have to knock on a neighbor's door at midnight in an ice storm because they have nowhere else to turn. Nadia moved to Vancouver. She sent Marin a single letter on Lila's birthday. "I know I was part of your pain. I won't insult you by pretending we could be friends. I only want you to know that telling the truth was the first honest thing I had done in longer than I care to admit. I hope your daughter grows up surrounded by the integrity the rest of us lacked." Marin read it twice, then she placed it in a drawer. Some apologies did not need a response. They only needed not to be thrown away. Lila's birthday party was small. June came up from Toronto. Catherine brought champagne. 2 neighbors from down the lake came with their kids. Dominic arrived carrying a wooden toy boat he had built himself in a woodworking class his therapist had recommended. It was uneven. The mast tilted slightly to port. The paint was a little thick in spots. Marin loved it more than anything he had ever bought her. When the guests left, Dominic stayed to help clean up. They stood side by side at the kitchen sink. Marin washing, Dominic drying. Snow fell outside the window in slow, heavy flakes. The cottage was warm. Lila slept upstairs in her crease that had cost Marin everything to build. "I got an offer," Dominic said, "to relocate the company HQ to Calgary. Bigger market, better tax structure." Marin's hands paused in the water. "I turned it down." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because my daughter is here." Her chest tightened. "And because," he said carefully, "the woman I failed is here. Not because I think I've earned anything, because I want to become the kind of man who would have deserved her." Marin turned off the tap. She dried her hands slowly. The kitchen was quiet except for the furnace ticking and the snow pressing against the glass. "You broke my heart, Dominic. I know. You humiliated me. Yes, you left me when I needed you most." His eyes reddened. "Yes, I don't know if what we had can survive that." He nodded. Pain moved across his face like weather. "But I know this," Marin said. "The man who sat across from me in that boardroom is not the man standing in my kitchen." Dominic stopped breathing. "I don't know what that means yet," she continued, "but I'm willing to find out." Slowly, his eyes filled. "Slowly is more than I deserve." "Yes," Marin said. "It is." He gave a quiet, broken laugh. She smiled, and for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the silence between them was not a weapon. It was rest. The following autumn, Briar Cliff hosted its first community harvest dinner. Long wooden tables were arranged along the shoreline beneath strings of warm lights. Neighbors sat between the birch trees, eating as the last light faded over Peninsula Lake. Lila, walking now with the fearless determination of someone who had never been told no, chased fireflies near June, while Catherine documented everything on her phone. Marin wore a linen dress the color of lake water. She moved between guests easily, laughing, pouring wine, adjusting a candle. Dominic watched her from the edge of the gathering. He had seen her in gala gowns and diamonds, in magazine features and developer showcases. He had never seen her look like this, luminous, grounded, entirely herself. Later, when the tables were cleared and the light swayed gently in the breeze, Dominic found Marin near the old stone wall at the property's edge. He held out a small box. Marin's smile faded. "Dominic, it's not a ring," he said. She eyed him. He opened the box. Inside was an old iron key, dark with age, heavy in the hand. "The Halliburton cabin," he said. "I've transferred it into Lila's trust." "No conditions, no control from me, fully hers." Marin stared at the key. "Why?" "Because legacy shouldn't be another word for control." Her eyes softened. He closed the box and placed it in her hand. "And because I want her to inherit at least one thing from me that's clean." Marin looked at the key, then at him. "You're still trying to make up for it." "I'll probably be trying for the rest of my life." "That sounds exhausting." He smiled gently. "Loving you badly was exhausting. Being honest is easier." Marin's eyes glistened. The night air carried the smell of pine and wood smoke and cold water. The lake was black and still. Behind them, Lila's laughter drifted through the trees like something that had always belonged there. For a long time, Marin had believed that justice meant watching Dominic fall, and karma had found him. It had stripped his pride, exposed his deceptions, cost him partnerships, humbled his name, and forced him to confront the man he had chosen to become. But somewhere along the way, justice had become something deeper than punishment. Justice was not just his reckoning, it was her rising. It was Lila laughing in a home filled with warmth. It was Briar Cliff alive with voices. It was Marin no longer hidden, no longer silent, no longer replaceable. It was the truth, finally, standing in the open air. Dominic reached for her hand. Then he stopped, waited. Marin noticed that small hesitation, the willingness to pause, to ask without asking, to understand that trust was not something to seize, but something to be offered, said more than any speech he could have written. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers carefully. "The way you hold something you know you almost lost forever." "I don't want to go back to what we were," Marin said. "Neither do I. I want something honest. So do I. I want peace. I'll protect it." She looked at him steadily. "And if you ever become that man again, I won't ask you to stay," he said quietly. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to choose between loving me and loving yourself." A tear slipped down her cheek. He wiped it gently with his thumb, then lowered his hand. Marin stepped closer. Not because she had forgotten, not because the wounds had vanished, because she had healed enough to choose without fear. Their kiss was quiet, not the desperate collision of a fairy tale, not the perfect ending of people who had never bled. It was the kiss of two people standing on what pride had nearly destroyed, choosing to build something humbler, something truer, something earned behind them. Lila made a sleepy sound from her stroller. Marin laughed through her tears. Dominic looked down at his daughter, then back at Marin. "Do you think she'll forgive me one day?" Marin touched his face. "Be the kind of father who never makes her question whether she's loved. That will be enough." Years later, people would tell the story different ways. Some would say, Marin Aldridge brought a billionaire developer to his knees in a Bay Street boardroom. Some would say, Dominic Kessler lost everything and rebuilt himself from the wreckage. Some would whisper about the lover who turned witness, the hidden lake house, the baby at the settlement meeting, the look on a powerful man's face when his lies walked into the room wearing a yellow knitted hat. But Marin knew the real story. It was not about a billionaire's shame. It was about a woman who walked into the end of her marriage carrying a baby, a blueprint, and the truth. It was about a man who learned too late and at great cost that money could buy silence but never loyalty. It was about karma doing its work and grace doing what karma alone could not. Because in the end, Marin did not get back the marriage she had lost. She got something better, a life where she was no longer begging to be chosen, a love that had learned, at last, how to kneel, and a daughter who would grow up knowing that her mother was not the woman her father. It was the woman who walked into the storm with a newborn strapped to her chest and came out the other side holding the keys to her own life. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep creating the heartfelt stories you love. Thank you for watching.